This video introduces a series of videos on Excel and VBA best practices focusing on manipulating and accessing external data. It's brought to you by PolarisInvesting.com, a site for creating defensible valuations. As a reminder, business valuation is based on expectations derived from skillful consideration of past facts and future possibilities. To access these series of videos, you go out to the PolarisInvesting.com site and then select Dropbox. From there you select the subfolder External Data. You can see a folder called Videos, and it has all the videos, including the video that you're currently watching, the introduction video. Now backing up, there's also a subfolder called Spreadsheets that has spreadsheets that will be discussed during the series of videos, and also the introduction text that we're currently discussing. Another way to access the videos is from the Polaris Investing YouTube channel. On this channel is a series of playlists. If you scroll down here to the bottom, there's a section titled Free Applications and a playlist under that section titled Excel VBA App Code Review. The videos in this playlist are mostly from the experiences going through and creating a free Excel application called the Polaris Portfolio Return App. These videos are not intended to cover the basics of Excel. There's many available training sites out there on the internet and YouTube to cover basics of Excel, nor is it a site to cover basics of VBA programming. But I do want to point out one site in particular if you're interested in learning more about Excel VBA programming. This is a site that's put together by Kelly, that useful to fill in some gap in terms of some more advanced VBA concepts. Paul has a pull-up course. It's referred here on his website called Excel Macro Mastery. You can see here the Excel, it's called the Handbook course for $399. So I have not taken this course, but based on free YouTube videos that I have watched, I feel that it's probably of similar high quality. Well, as stated at the beginning of this video, the purpose of this series of videos is to talk in enough detail that you're going to be able to end up writing an application that's shown here. It's just an application called QueryIt. And what this does is it simply has a cell where you can enter in a ticker to a back-end database, a SQL Server database. You can see here the actual select statement that's being displayed that's going to be run based on the selection made here in A1. Then it comes back and it queries the database and shows you that every ticker that starts with MS in this database and some of the fields associated with those particular tickers is shown. Now with the ticker selected, you can use the prices worksheet to retrieve JSON formatted real-time price quotes, and we'll be covering this more in detail later on in the series of videos. Over here to the right, we also show some JSON formatting, and then we'll be covering exactly how to go about retrieving specific fields from this JSON text. And then all the way over to the right is some comma separated values, and then we'll be showing how to extract fields from particular records from that kind of formatted data. It's important to understand which side of Excel are you on. I'm going to use this analogy of a scoreboard, but if you're on the outside looking at the scoreboard or looking at Excel, yeah, you view cell as a bunch of individual cells, and in those particular cells you can have literal values or formulas that do things. If one cell changes, then the formulas cause the other cells to change. But you need to realize that again, using this analogy, that like the individual there you see with his head sticking out, that behind the scene, a program that's actually monitoring what the user is doing and invoking the execution of formulas and things like that. So I'm going to refer to that kind of behind the scenes Excel application as this individual that's shown here in the picture. Now behind the scenes, and this is kind of that individual again, this sitting there, Mr. Excel, we'll call him. As a programmer, you can walk through and get to the back, but here you are as the VBA programmer. You don't have really direct control over what goes on behind the scenes, but it's still Mr. Excel that decides what eventually gets put up for users of the spreadsheet to see. So you need to be aware. When you're working with Excel, are you talking about what the user sees in terms of the scoreboard, or are we talking about VBA concepts where you're the VBA programmer behind the scenes working with Mr. Excel? The videos making up this series are aligning with this analogy of a scoreboard, the front of the scoreboard and the back end VBA portion of the scoreboard. So you can see here over to the left that right now we're doing the introduction. Next we'll have 4 videos on Excel. Follow on 4 videos we'll be dealing with VBA, and then we'll end talking about the S&P 500 Analyzer app from Polaris, in particular the APIs that were written to facilitate data access and manipulation. To give you a better idea of what these videos will cover, so let's go back through this outline here. Second video, the first one on Excel, is going to talk about the creation of a separate worksheet called generally the Manage worksheet, and the kind of things you want to include on that worksheet to control how the spreadsheet functions. Talk about how to configure Excel and for trustworthiness and for appropriate protection against harmful VBA code being executed. We'll also talk about some recommended Polaris provided functions that should be included in every spreadsheet that accesses data. Next video we'll talk about cell references, in particular volatile functions, and really the reason why you should avoid using volatile functions. Talk about dynamic ranges, how to create a range that's not just from like cell A1 to D15, but be able to have a flexible or dynamic ranges. Next we will discuss the soon-to-be released XLOOKUP function that is currently in beta by Microsoft. And then we'll talk about formula execution paths and unintended behavior on recalculation. Next video we will talk about useful built-in Excel functions and Polaris provided functions. Going to spend some time comparing pivot tables with using the very versatile sum products function. Also going to discuss some issues with the functions mod, int, and round. Next video we'll talk about techniques that have been developed to deal with date and time, and even the Unix date and time, converting that to Windows date and time. How to deal with blanks and non-blanks and columns, removing blank lines, how to determine distinct values in a column, how to alphabetize, how to determine first and last rows in a column containing a non-blank. And then also we're going to talk about tracing and timing of your function calls, because often you get into performance problems where functionally your formulas in your VBA code work as expected, but it's just slow. So you want to have a way to track the execution of functions, and we'll talk about a function called echo back, and then the use of a counter called get tick count. Next couple of videos have to do with VBA. The first video on VBA talks about the workbook template, specifically in the context of VBA. It talks about how to protect your VBA modules or project. It talks about how to hide certain worksheets from the spreadsheet user. Video talks about Excel configuration as it deals with VBA. Related to Excel configuration are built-in functions that control what happens when a spreadsheet is first opened and right before it's closed. Also talk about the Polaris function system check that is recommended that be included in spreadsheets. The next video we will talk about discusses useful VBA functions, both Excel built-in functions and Polaris supplied functions. We will compare some VBA built-in functions with their counterparts on the Excel side. Then we'll discuss Polaris provided functions that you may find useful, and then we'll talk about one VBA function in particular called round that you should be aware of some unintended side effects from it. Next video is going to talk about VBA Techniques. We'll briefly review how you record macros, although it's not really recommended to you code in VBA using macros, but you can use them as examples, and it's a good way to learn about concepts. Calling functions, we'll talk about different ways you can call VBA functions. Next we'll talk about concept of worksheet events and what are the most common events that you want to write VBA code for. And then we'll talk about how do you control recalculation of cells in your spreadsheet. We'll talk about next moving data to and from Excel and the back-end VBA arrays and how it's important that you do in VBA most of your calculation in VBA. Get it how you want it, then you bulk load the data into the cells to display to the user. Talk about error handling in VBA and date time functions in VBA, and then we'll talk about tracing again that we briefly talked about in the Excel videos. The next video is going to be probably the most interesting to people. With all this groundwork now in the preceding videos, we're in a position now to talk about external data access. And we'll be using the QueryIt spreadsheet that was briefly shown at the beginning of this video to demonstrate concepts. We'll talk about ways to pull data from the web using JavaScript object notation or JSON formatted data and comma separated values CSV formatted data. And then we'll also talk about pulling data from a SQL database. Talk about the available data sets that are out there, commercial data sets that you may want to get a license for. And talk a little bit about the common practice of screen scraping from websites. Talk about why that's really something that you should not do. Next we'll talk about an Excel function called web service. Very handy way to go grab data, external data. Really talk about Power Query and the trade-offs with using Power Query. And then we'll talk more about JSON and Polaris provided JSON parser. And then we'll talk about ActiveX data objects, namely ADO, to pull data from the database. And then the last video we'll talk about concrete example using the S&P 500 Analyzer app. We'll enjoy watching the series of videos on Excel and VBA and accessing and manipulating external data. Thanks for watching.